Welcome back to a Boxscore Geeks show. I'm one of your hosts, Andres Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. We have the original Boxscore Geek, Patrick Minton, on with us, who is at NBA Geek on Twitter. Say hey, Patrick.
Hey, how's it going?
And then, of course, we have our producer, Brian Foster, who goes by Boxscore Brian on Twitter. We call him the voice of God on this podcast because what he says goes. Say what's up, Brian, just so the listeners know what's going on.
What's up, guys? It's going to be a great show tonight.
All right, our topic tonight will be the NBA's new TV deal and the implications for the CBA and upcoming work stoppage that I think everybody knows is coming. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the NBA Geek returning to Vegas. Patrick, this is a fun thing you've been doing every year, putting your money where your mouth is. I think overall you're up, and we definitely have a few things to say about that. But the huge thing, if you're an NBA fan, hopefully you've seen this, the NBA just signed a huge multi-billion-dollar deal that I believe is going to put them through the mid-2020s, so like 2025. That's basically going to do what everybody knew it was going to do, which is just pump basketball-related income super high, which means bigger contracts are coming. And as a result, there's been a slew of things around this. And there's actually a lot to talk about, Patrick. So I'm just going to start throwing subjects your way because I've got stuff to say, but I want to hear some of your patented NBA Geek rants on this. The first one that's interesting to me is LeBron James and Durant Williams have already spoken out against this. I believe they're both part of the Players Association. I think is Durant the leader currently, or I forget who's. Anybody know who's
Durant's
leading
always
it?
been vocal, regardless of where he is in the hierarchy.
Yeah, I forget the pecking order at the moment, but both Durant and LeBron, nice rhyming there, have spoken out and basically said, all right.
Actually, I want to jump in and correct you, Dre. I think the correct pronunciation is Darren Williams, not Durant. I don't think it does rhyme.
It's one of those I say it in my head, and then I guess I don't watch. It's clear I don't watch net games, so thank you.
My apologies. Keep going.
No. Correct me when I mess up players' names, because we do that a lot, and then it turns into a joke when we say Kawhi Leonard about a million different ways. Okay, so they both come out and said, hey, look, the owners last lockout were screaming bloody murder about losing money, and we've just seen some teams sell for major bucks. We've just seen the TV money just skyrocket. That's not going to fly next time. I wrote an article a little bit about this already, Patrick, but I'm curious if you think there's, obviously we think that holds merit, but do you think the players have any shot with this?
Oh, I agree completely with you. The players' only chance is if they strike during the playoffs or before the playoffs. The thing that's stupid about this is that all these arguments were true 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, right? I mean, they were saying they were losing money, but they weren't losing money. That hasn't really changed. It's not as if it was a big mystery that the next TV deal was going to be bigger than the previous TV deal. Now, I think the writing was on the wall back then, but it has become more and more obvious to everybody since then that as far as old media goes, as far as like cable TV networks and broadcast TV networks goes, live sports are worth far, far more than traditional network TV because it's the one and only thing that fans will always want to see live and don't want to see on tape delay. So your advertising revenue, especially amongst the popular 18 to 49-year-old males, is going to be crazy. And that trend was obvious a few years ago, but it's just gotten more and more blindingly obvious since then. But all of these things were true. I mean, we spent most of our I spent most of the first few weeks of the NBA Geek back then, my original blog, just talking about the ridiculousness behind these cries of poverty, right? I mean, my favorite one was the owners talking about the ballooning size of salaries, even though salaries are tied. Now I think everybody understands salaries are a fixed percentage of basketball revenue. So salaries can only balloon if total revenue is ballooning, and salaries, your expenses on salaries is always the same, no matter what the size of the number is. It's always the same.
Fill that in too, because some other people pointed out, some teams go over the cap and stuff. It's a closed system. What happens is if the Lakers go massively over the salary cap, they've been spending over 80 million a year when they were winning titles, and now the same players. That money goes into a pot that then is redistributed to the people that don't go over the cap. So it's not even like when you say that, the out of control salaries, that money just gets redistributed, even if some teams spend more than others.
Right. There is no such thing as out of control salaries or ballooning salaries, right? In the old deal, players made 57%, I think it was 57, right, of basketball revenue. And that was true at the beginning of the deal. That was true at the end of the deal. There was no such thing as ballooning salaries. There never was. But it was a great media story that every idiot journalist reprinted when it came out of the mouths of David Stern or any NBA owner. And so, I mean, the NBA and the NBA PA, all they really had to do was, do a little bit of really trivial research to discover that the whole cries of poverty thing were never true. And to be honest, I don't think that had anything to do with why the lockout ended the way it did last time. It's not like the lockout ended because all the players got together and nodded their heads and said, yeah, the owners are really poor. Let's give them a bit of a kickback because they're poor and we need to help them out. That's not why the lockout ended the way it did. The lockout ended the way it did because the players didn't strategically act very well, right? The head of the union, Billy Hunter, was a notoriously poor executive who pretty much just did favors for friends and family. He was surrounded by sycophants and wasn't really very good at his job. And the players as a mass are not very organized and don't really coordinate well together. And that's why I think the owners are going to win the next lockout now too, regardless of what LeBron and Kobe and Deron Williams say. It's not going to matter. I mean, the players don't act together the way traditional unions do.
So let me throw something out. I'll preemptively say the shout out I'm going to give this week. It's to Al S. I posted about how the players should strike before the playoffs. This is something Dave said, something you've said. We'll talk about it more, I'm sure. But he brought up that there is actually a no strike clause in the current CBA. And what is amazing about this clause is the clause says the players agree not to strike and the owners agree not to lock the players out as long as the CBA is in effect. The fact that this made it in is just remarkable to me on the players' part, to just show how, it sounds mean, but bad at this they are, because the owners have done 2 lockouts and the lockouts have happened when the CBA has expired. So they basically had an agreement with the owners. They said, okay, this sounds fair. We'll agree not to strike. You agree not to lock us out. But clearly you've already lost that discussion, because the only time it's worth striking is when the CBA is in effect. The only time it's worth locking out is when the CBA is up. So the players agreed to that. They put that in writing. Yeah. And now people have been tweeting at me about it. And it clearly shows, like, well, but
this is also a formality. And now I agree with Al that this presents a problem because of what I just said. The union is poorly organized. But all it takes to void the CBA is for the union to get enough people together in the same room and to vote and to void the CBA. And the instant you do that, boom, it's now legal to strike. That's not a problem. And they can also do what you said in response to Al. They can strike anyway, because they can be like, okay, we're striking. We know it's illegal, so sue us.
It's void the CBA. That's the thing. It's not illegal. It's a contract thing.
Right. But I mean, that's what I'm saying is the union can say, okay, we're in breach of contract. Okay, go ahead, sue us for breach of contract. But in the meantime, we're not going to play any playoff games. And I mean, that's true. It's true that the NBA could sue the players for damages afterwards, but that legal process would cost them a ton of time. And almost certainly any such process there would be an agreement to waive that if they all got together and agreed on a new CBA. Like, it would, I mean, Michelle Roberts is not a moron. I'm sure she would be like, okay, we're going to do a new CBA, but oh, by the way, one of the agreements in the new CBA is that you're going to waive like any right to sue us for this breach of contract that we just did in this current strike. I mean, I think that's a technicality. I mean, that would really affect their ability to do things like to strike in this year's playoffs or something like that. But for the most part, I don't think the players would want to do that anyway.
Yeah, I mean, this is something you and David both mentioned, and I think the key, and I hadn't even thought about this because you talked back to me about it in the comments, is striking in the playoffs is key because the players don't really make any money. Like I said, I looked up some numbers back. It's Bleacher Report, we were talking about before the show, you know, whatever, about a news source. They basically said there's about $14 million in a big pot to go to all the teams, all 16 teams in the playoffs. Out of date records. This is from the old New Jersey Nets, who were not a popular team, who, you know, were bounced from the first round of the playoffs when these numbers were leaked. But during the time that their financials were leaked, I think to Deadspin or Slate or whatever, they basically reported, hey, we made about $1 million every home playoff game. And this is, again, first round playoff games, 2 games. So, you know, the owners stand to lose a lot more money. It's essentially free money to them. And then I think the bigger point is that it's a big deal. The owners want to win a title. And so that you've got to hit them where it's not just money, because the owners have billions. They can afford to wait it out. And you actually said, when you were talking about the players not being organized, well, the advantage of striking during the playoffs is you're already going to have half the players on board to begin with. They're not in the playoffs. They're not going to make any money. They don't care. You tell them, hey, strike, and they'll stand with the other people. And at least you have some solidarity there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the NBA's big problem, obviously, is always going to be organization. I think, you know, the number of people that I mean, even during the last lockout, there was a lot of articles about, you know, the voter turnout being surprisingly low. Like the number of players that are actually engaged and involved in the discussions and the negotiations, et cetera, is a pretty low number. And, you know, that it's no wonder that the big stars who have the most to gain or lose in the negotiations are the ones that do most of the serious negotiating.
But then even that, one of the most brilliant things, and by the way, this happened during the last lockout, was capping how much you could pay the max players, because this essentially did a very subtle thing, which was it gave all of these middle players that we've talked about before replaceable, right? Like you can't replace Kevin Durant, but you can replace Anthony Morrow, who we'll talk more about later. You know, so these middle players that are making, you know, mid-range contracts know they're replaceable, know they stand a lot to lose if they don't every day they're not playing. So they'll jump on board and say, heck yeah, just sign the contract. I don't care. I don't care if you're going to cost me 3% of my earnings, because I know perfectly well if we don't get signed soon, I'm going to lose out. A team's not going to pick me up, and I'm going to lose out millions. So just sign it. And, you know, Kevin Durant, he can only make 17 million or whatever. So he's got no incentive, you know, he'll cave too eventually because he doesn't have enough power. Whereas if they were making $50 million.
See, now I disagree with you there, because like if you look at Kevin Durant or LeBron James, right? You look at the sizes of their contract, 3% is a big deal for them.
Yeah.
In terms of absolute value, but their NBA salary is not such a big deal in terms of a percentage of their income, right? I mean, Durant just signed a shoe deal, and this is shoes alone, not any of his other endorsement, just shoes, where his salary almost doubles what he's making in the NBA, right? And that's just shoes. That's not counting Wheaties or whatever the hell else he does, right? I think it's a $270 10-year deal with Nike.
It says Nike has, this was, I'm looking at September 3rd. It says Nike has signed Oklahoma City Thunder star Kevin Durant to a new sportswear. Oh, this is sportswear. So I don't know if that includes shoes too, but it says could be worth $300 million.
Right. So, I mean, and that's one sponsor, right? That's not Gatorade or any of the other things he does. So you can say that, like, I mean, Durant obviously cares about his NBA salary. It's not pennies to him, but he doesn't have to worry about feeding his family or, you know, or, and I don't mean that as a pejorative. Like, he doesn't need to worry about maintaining his lifestyle if he's locked out of the NBA. Whereas a guy who's making $3 million a year and who has like a 4, 5, 6 year window in the NBA to earn all his money, and then he's got to live on it for the rest of his life, he's worried about maintaining his lifestyle forever, right? It's the 3% doesn't make a difference to him, but it makes a big difference to a businessman like LeBron James or Kevin Durant, you know, where they are essentially their own brand.
Oh, I mean, I agree with it, but all I'm saying is that you wind up in this point where those middle players are eventually going to overwhelm the stars.
Sure. And anytime that things boil down to a vote, those players have a lot of power. But you'll find that in union negotiations, what it often boils down to is the significant power players don't want to put everything to a vote, right? Because they don't want, like, you know, in fact, during the last lockout, you know, it was you constantly heard from the NBA owners, it's like, hey, why don't you guys take a vote? Why don't you guys take a vote? Why don't you guys take a vote? Right? Because they know that the more often they vote, the more likely the players are to cave. So the union leaders are going to be very reluctant to put things to a vote too often, right? Because they don't. I mean, they want to make sure that the needs of sort of a vulnerable majority don't overweigh the needs of the union itself. I mean, this is kind of a weird thing to say, but like the majority often will not act in its own interest because each individual person in the majority, it's kind of a prisoner's dilemma situation, right?
Absolutely.
For a guy like for a guy like Anthony Morrow or Thabo Sefolosha, who we're also going to talk about later, like it's in their best interest to just get it over with and make the deal now because the money they lose from being on strike 2 months, they're never going to make that up by getting 3% more or less, right? So what their personal interest is contrary to the interest of the majority, because obviously for the majority, it's better to make 53% than 47%.
Yeah. Well, it's fun. I don't know who I was saying this to, but basically the problem you run into is that you basically have to have a group of NBA players that are willing to sacrifice their current generation, right, of earning for future generations. And I mean, I can understand why that's hard to get any set to do.
Well,
On
and,
that note,
and that's why the superstars have tons of power, and that's political power, if not actual voting power, because for them, their earnings do span multiple CBAs, right? So a guy like during the last lockout, a guy like LeBron, he's worried about what the next lockout is going to be like because he knows he's going to still be making money during the next lockout. So he doesn't want, he wouldn't have wanted the last one to go to 47 because then he'd be fighting in the next one to go to 47 from 47 to 50 instead of from 50 to 53.
Yeah, and I mean, by the way, one thing Dave mentioned this during the last lockout too. One of the funny things that could happen, I doubt it ever will, but if we're talking strategies, strike before the playoffs. If all of the stars, if the top 20 players in the league got together and said, you know what, we're going to go to Europe if you don't meet our demands next year, that could be interesting. But these strategies, I just don't think.
Yeah,
I don't think
obviously Europe doesn't work, but I just don't understand. Like, so it really wouldn't be that implausible to say for the top 20 stars to say, let's start like the USBL again, and and I mean you really don't need a lot, right? You need a charter and you need some managers and you rent out the arena space and okay, maybe you're running like a budget operation for the first 3-4 months, but the point is you don't really need that much, and if they got serious about it in any way, like serious at all, you would suddenly find the NBA owners very eager to negotiate in good faith. Because that's part of the problem is that the owners have never negotiated in good faith for these things.
Yeah, actually, Brian and I were talking in the pre-show. Basically, the last time the players really had power, first off, was when the ABA was in existence and strong. The ABA, by the way, the funny thing is the ABA was never a real league. It had real talent, which was funny. But in terms of organization and how well that league was run, it was always kind of, you never knew if it was going to make it to the next year.
It was very much, the way it was in the movie Semi-Pro.
Yeah. So in the 1970s, though, you had two major cases, which was Haywood versus the National Basketball Association, which basically lowered the limit. They said it was antitrust to not allow, people out of high school to come into the NBA. And Oscar Robertson, who basically he did away with the restricted free agency as we used to know it. People don't realize this. Restricted free agency used to mean when your contract was up, your team said, we want to rehire you. If they wanted to rehire you, you went back to your old team. No, there was no go.
Yeah, it wasn't even as good as arbitration in baseball used to be.
Yeah, it was basically like it was kind of a loophole where the way they worded the contract, it was we get to match your contract and we get to offer first. So basically they would always offer it. So it's silly. But that was in the 70s when there was actually competition. And since then, the players have not really had any major win. So, yeah. There's one last topic I want to talk before. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I thought the 1999 lockout was kind of a win for the players, but I don't remember it very well.
I do know that's where max salary caps came into play. So I wonder if on the whole they did all right. I mean, clearly they ended up with
this is interesting because even the owners have agreed that max salary caps don't really benefit them, right? I mean, as long as the salary cap's in place, the max salary cap is kind of irrelevant to owners. It was a misguided attempt to go for parity, but as many have pointed out, it's actually works against parity because of the max salary cap, you can afford to pay 3 players the max, right? But if you had to play LeBron James 40 million and your salary cap was 60 million, now you suddenly cannot afford to pay 3 superstars.
Or as Dave points out a lot too, now this discussion about where to play stops being about money and it starts being about what you want. Most players want to win. So when LeBron James' options are be loyal to Cleveland or go to Miami, of course he's going to pick Miami to go for the title because they're both going to pay him the same or close to the same. But on that note, I don't know if you heard this too. I feel bad about this because our poll on last week's show was between Daryl Morey and Mark Cuban. I love this feud. I love the Rockets and the Mavericks feud. I hope it goes on forever. The vote, by the way, from the Boxscore Geeks voters currently sits Daryl Morey at 51 votes against Mark Cuban at 52. So, wow, that's close. But Mark Cuban came out and said, yeah, maybe we could get rid of max contracts. Maybe they are a relic. But then he made this comment that bugged me where he said, sorry, we're going a little over, Brian, but he said, if we got rid of guaranteed contracts. And one of the things that I love you, Mark Cuban, but one thing that's always kind of bugged me is he's a capitalist on like shows like Shark Tank and all this stuff. And then when it comes to the NBA, he'll say stuff like, we need an age limit or we need, contracts can't be that way. When, if you look at.
Yeah, I'm actually not really convinced that an age limit benefits the NBA that much. I really don't think, I'm not really convinced that a guy who comes in at 21 after 2 years of college is really, mature and riper and more NBA ready than a guy who comes in at 18 or 19. Now, I understand the logic. The logic is, okay, I get a guy coming in 18, 19, whatever. I don't the rookie contract's the best contract. So I want to maximize the amount of time that a player is effective during his rookie contract because that's essentially the best bang for my buck as an owner. I get that. But I am not convinced that raising the age limit to 20 actually improves your bang for the buck. I think it really just delays the start of when players start to get better.
Well,
I think that the players just waste their time in college, right? And if you look at players like Anthony Davis or the real superstars, the ones where the rookie contract is the most valuable, it's actually a really bad deal for the Rockets or the whoever that they couldn't have had that player a year earlier, right? Clearly, the year that Anthony Davis spent in college is, from the NBA's perspective, a lost year because he would have been amazing in the NBA in that year too, right? He came in, he was amazing as a rookie. He would have been amazing a year ago. It kind of, when you look at LeBron James, if LeBron James had spent a year in college, that would have been a disaster for the NBA. So I don't think, part of it is, okay, let's try to maximize the effectiveness of our rookie contracts, our bang for the buck on rookie contracts. Part of it also is, let's try to protect the NBA from the idiot owners who draft any random schlub out of high school and it busts all the time. But as a capitalist, we've had conversations with Cuban on the internet, not like actual live face-to-face conversations, but we know that Mr. Cuban believes that his scouting staff and his coaching staff is better than everybody else's. So he should be in favor of any system that makes it possible for other teams to make big mistakes in terms of drafting young players. He should be saying, let's eliminate the age limit entirely, because I know my competitors in crazy towns like Orlando and other people who don't know what the hell they're doing, they're going to make all these crazy bad mistakes, whereas my smart coaching and scouting staff is going to make good mistakes, and we're going to bring in great players, and we're going to get more money from them, right? Sorry, not money, but return on investment for those players.
Well, same difference.
I'm kind of going back to the point you're making that he's a capitalist on Shark Tank, so he should be in the NBA. But let's also remember that he's, part of advocating for sort of a socialist system of doing things in the NBA is because you're a capitalist, right? If you're a capitalist and you own a monopoly, you want to preserve that monopoly, right?
Yeah,
monopoly.
Monopoly. I always do want to call those
I think the NBA is more of a cartel than a monopoly, but in any case, you want to preserve that cartel, right? You wouldn't want to break it up because that's why you make a lot of money.
But I do call those things out every time I see them, where I'm like,
oh, well, I'm fine with pointing, with calling him on the bullshit, but I don't think that Mr. Cuban's internal logic is inconsistent. I do think he's selling the public a little bit of a fib there, but I don't think he's being internally like.
No,
I don't
I
think
mean
he's being
he's
disingenuous.
he's a smart guy. He he knows what's good for his team, and I mean he knows like the last. He's actually been one of the bigger proponents against stupid lockout stuff. He knows the last lockout probably cost him a second shot at a title with, Tyson Chandler. So there you go. I think that's all. I mean, there was a ton on that to begin with, and we went over, but that's fine. I mean, there's more time to talk. This has become a tradition now at the Boxscore Geeks. I think it's one of everybody's favorites. We should probably come up with a better way to track it this year because, you did the check-ins, but maybe we can get a regular page that has something. Maybe now I've got more time to develop. Maybe I'll put something together. But you go to Vegas every year. You look at Arturo's ratings and then also kind of some of your own, I'll say this, and I think we've discussed this already. I don't think there's any error bars we can realistically put around NBA teams just because, like I said, I started doing the analysis on minutes. There's so much variance just even on minutes that any realistic error bar is just going to look silly in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, I think there are. So, I mean, what it boils down to is you have scenarios where you think Vegas is dead wrong, and so there you have an opportunity to make some money because your margin of error for being wrong about the minutes is huge. And that's the only reason the money's there is because there's a huge margin of error that you give yourself to be wrong about minute allocation and injuries and things like that, which is why it's pretty damn hard to make fistfuls of money on this kind of stuff. I also think that the years in which Vegas gets 2 or 3 teams dead wrong are relatively rare because usually there are enough transactions and some of them sort of counteract each other that it's very difficult for Vegas to get things totally wrong. So this year, the example I would give is Indiana. Let's assume a world where Paul George does not go down with injury. I think we would all prefer that world because it was a horrific injury anyway, right? But from a Vegas perspective, right? Indiana lost Lance Stevenson and they're replacing him with Rodney Stuckey, which is a huge downgrade. And I think most people agree that's a huge downgrade. But I do think that Vegas would have vastly underestimated the impact of that downgrade on wins if Paul George hadn't gone injured. So you would have had maybe they would have been maybe so they're at 55 last year. They probably would have put them at like 50 or 49 or 48 or something like that this year. And that would have been, in my opinion, a big opportunity to make money on an under bet because they barely squeaked into the under last year after having a just unbelievably hot start. And then they lost essentially their best player, even though it's not the consensus best player. He was their best player. Would have been a great opportunity to make money. But then, Paul George goes down with injury, and suddenly Vegas more or less gets the line right because of what I'm going to call dumb luck. And then you have situations like in the Knicks, where the Knicks kind of are. I think they're at 40 wins or something like that. Which, I mean, I'm not exactly sure why that number is there, but it seems like about the right number. But I'm not sure that the reasons for it in Vegas. I mean, I think the reasons for it are,
and Brendan.
Yeah, but I think the reasons for it have more to do with Vegas's obsession with Carmelo Anthony and he'll come back and he'll be better than ever and blah 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 blah. I don't think those are the reasons for it, right? I mean, I still think this year Philly's still a good bet, and I'm not saying this because I think Philly's going to be a good team. I'm not making that mistake again this year. I think that the thing about Philly is it's really freaking hard to lose 67 games. It is really hard to do. Only I think since in the shot clock era, sorry, I did a basketball reference thing. In the shot clock era, only 27 teams have done it, I think. So that means like in, only 2/3 of the years has it been done at all. So, it's pretty much an easy bet that any particular team won't be that bad in any given year. Like just from the law of averages, right? Yeah. I mean, it's just really hard to lose that many games. Like it's, you have some freakish nights where you hit a lot of shots and you generally tend to win 17, 18 games, right? And
well, I mean, that even happened with them last year. I mean, even to what you're saying, right?
Even when they were
actually as bad as Vegas thought, and they had some lucky games where they had a lucky streak where they won 4 games that they shouldn't have, right? Or,
well, I mean, they started 3-0, which was insane, right? I mean, and the thing is, like, so I saw a preview on Sports Nation, I think. The article started with, you know, Coach Brown knows that his team's not very good. So to make up for that, he's telling them to run really hard and play really fast. And the thing is, anybody that knows anything about about variance knows that that is exactly the opposite thing you would want to do if you're not very good. If you're like, ideally, if you're not very good at all, you would want to play exactly one possession. Like if there was no shot clock, you would instruct your guys, okay, guys, if we win the tip, don't shoot until the buzzer. That would be the only way we're going to win is we just hold on to the ball until the buzzer and we shoot and we get lucky and it goes in. And the same principle applies. Like, you know, if you're the best team, do you want to play a 7-game series or the 3-game series? The same principle applies in a basketball game. If you're the best team, do you want to play 100 possessions or 120 possessions? And the answer should be very simple. I want to play the most possessions possible because I know the more opportunities I get, the more likely it is that I'm the winner at the end. So if I'm the bad team, conversely, the answer is, well, I want to play as few possessions as possible in the hope that I get lucky in those possessions and we win. So anybody who's arguing that Brett is playing fast because he knows they're undermanned is crazy. To that I respond, Brett Brown is playing fast because he knows they're undermanned and he wants to lose. Those are the reasons he's playing fast. And my guess would be,
I've got basketball on paper in front of me, but Dean Oliver actually says this in there where he says,
yeah, I mean, my guess, I think Brett Brown is probably a pretty competitive guy. I think he wants to win every game. But if I had to randomly guess, and by the way, there's no insider information about this other than a random conversation over a beer at Sloan, which may or may not mean anything. But my guess would be that Brett Brown plays fast because Sam Hinkie knows that they're bad, and Sam Hinkie has told Brett Brown to play fast. So, and that's what, when we talk about tanking, that's Philadelphia's blatant tanking. They have the worst roster in basketball, and yet they play a very fast pace, which is exactly the opposite of what you should do from a game theory standpoint, right? From a game theory standpoint, if you have the worst rosters, you should be playing as slowly as possible. You should.
One other note to them on the over, though, by the way, to just wrap this up before going on to the Sheridan Hoop stuff, is the other thing is I'm wondering how closely Silver will be monitoring them, because we've been mentioning this before. They even did this before. What was it with Keith Bogans? They picked him up, and I think they did it by doing a second round pick swap. But basically, their second round pick is protected, whereas Cleveland's is not. So basically, they said,
wasn't that Boston? That was Boston.
No, I'm pretty sure.
No, that was Boston and Cleveland.
I think Philly got in on that. I thought Philly got another pick out of that.
Did Philly get on that? Okay.
I thought Philadelphia
maybe it was three-way trade. Okay. But the Bogans contract was in Boston's hands, right? We are agreed about that, right?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, they're sending a second-round pick to Philly in that trade somehow. No, they sent Bogans to Philly. They're going to send a second-round pick with him. Cavaliers get a trade exception. Philly gets another second-round pick. In theory, it was a second-round pick trade, but their second-round pick is protected.
I thought Cleveland ended up with Bogans in the scenario.
Well, I think Cleveland got Bogans from. Sorry, this has got to be boring, but basically,
this is like some Larry Kuhn craziness here.
Yeah, Philadelphia picked up another second-round pick. Is all I'm saying. They've been stockpiling picks, losing on purpose.
There's nothing wrong with stockpiling picks, and even, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with trading away good players to stockpile picks if you don't need those good players now, because that's just a matter of future versus present assets, and you go with the highest value either way. But
I'm just saying, next year, Silver, come the end of the season time, may be looking closer at Philly, and they may be more obligated to win a couple out towards the end.
Yeah, I think if there's anything going to be done here, it'll be that they change the way the lottery is structured, thus making the whole losing on purpose strategy less lucrative, which then means Philadelphia maybe goes from a, hey, let's lose on purpose strategy to a, hey, let's just not care whether we win strategy, which is a significantly different strategy. So, I mean, my personal view about Philadelphia so far is that Brett Brown, and probably this is on purpose in their organization, right? Brett Brown is trying his best to win in a system where he's hamstrung in how he can win because he has to play fast. And so since he has to play fast, he's going to lose a lot of games because it just makes it more likely that the better team wins when you play fast. But he does try his best to win in that like sort of fast system, and I'm sure that the last thing Hinkie or anyone in that organization would want is to be accused of losing on purpose. So I'm sure their only mandate to the coaching team is you have to play fast, right? And there might be some mandates like, okay, like last year, okay, like you can't play Nerlens Noel because we're going to protect him from being injured again. And the same might happen with Joel Embiid this year, right? Or almost certainly will happen, right? But that's not, I mean, to me, that doesn't equate to losing on purpose. That equates to not caring about winning.
Oh, and by the way, only 10 teams have gotten a win-loss record of worse than 17%. So that's in the history. That's going back to the BAA. So anyway, last note on over-under, you got into some fun on Twitter with Sheridan Hoops, where this is kind of something we've discussed, which is we're okay with people disagreeing with us, but it's when the logic is inconsistent. So as we mentioned, you're going to put your bets on Vegas this year. You're going to keep everybody updated. We're going to get made fun of for some of them. You're going to get vindicated for others.
No, the vindication never happens. That's
so like no one gave any love for like the $1,000 I think you put on New York last year.
No, vindication never happens.
Except
because when you're right, when you're right, everyone just says, "Oh, we knew that too. That was obvious."
But you came home with some money last year, right? Isn't that vindication enough? Like
the ROI was about. So the ROI was about. It was about 10 or 15%, which doesn't quite beat the stock market.
10 or 15% stock market, really?
Well,
depends on what you're doing.
It depends on the year, obviously. Yeah. But a year, like an annual return of 10 to 15% isn't spectacular, right? It's not amazing. But let's just say it doesn't beat the S&P 500. That's a better way to put it.
All right.
Which, by the way, investor tip: if you are in the stock market, all you should be doing is buying S&P 500 index funds. You shouldn't be trying to freaking time where Apple's going to go or anything like that. Anyway, so it was about 10 or 15%, and that's with some crazy bad luck. I mean,
you missed like a couple teams by like 2 or 3, right?
No, I missed 2 teams by exactly by 1 game exactly. The Pacers, I missed by I pushed on the Pacers, missed by 1 game. Let's see, I pushed on the Jazz, I believe.
Yeah.
So also by 1 game. And there was one other team. I can't remember which team that was very close.
We'll put those up in the.
We'll put those up later. Yeah. I mean, and then that's not even counting luck like Al Horford getting injured and or reverse luck like Portland going crazy hot at the beginning of the season and the Pacers running way hotter than they should have at the beginning of the season and that kind of thing, right? Yeah. So, I mean, and obviously some of that is luck and some of that is variance. And I'm pretty confident I can do 10 to 20% again this year. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. But and then what I was going to say is just we're already getting into discussion with some people. So, for instance, the one on Sheridan Hoops is they basically we love this, right? The logic that you called them out is they said Houston's going to get worse this year because the loss of Chandler Parsons hurt. And you're like, oh, okay, fair point. But then they immediately go, Washington is really going to hurt with the loss of Trevor Ariza. And you kind of just go, that's this is actually an Allen Iverson, Andre Miller trade, which was funny in Denver, which is you rarely get the exact same position just getting swapped out between 2 players and just getting to watch what happens. And like as a natural experiment, being able to prove Allen Iverson was overrated was perfect there. And this is the same thing here, where it's like Chandler Parsons is just going to get replaced by Trevor Ariza. So you I'm not 100% confident Ariza is going to be as good as Parsons. I'm 60-70% confident that that's going to happen. But the point is, his own logic is that I'm going to pick the unders on the Wizards because it's really going to hurt that they're losing Ariza. But I'm also going to pick the under on Houston because they lost a ton of talent without him sitting back and doing 5 seconds of thinking about where did Ariza go and why is his loss going to hurt Washington so much, but it's not going to help Houston. It doesn't make any internal sense, right? And that's the kind of thing that just makes me just kind of bang my head on my phallic microphone here.
It's crazy.
Sadly,
just
you're
absurd
cropped out,
logic.
so
Like,
the viewers
you
don't
know,
get to see that.
you can disagree with me. You can evaluate teams however you want, but please, just at least be internally in your own little screwed up logical world. Be internally consistent, please.
So another fun one in terms of internal logic, I believe this was Sheridan Hoops as well, is they said Oklahoma City is going to be better, and you agree. And let's actually hear your exact reasoning. I want to make sure I don't want to misquote.
Yeah, Oklahoma. He picks the over on Oklahoma, and I'm like, yeah, I think I kind of agree with that. And then I read the logic, and it's like, well, they picked up Anthony Morrow, and they lost Thabo Cephalosha, and Anthony Morrow's better than Cephalosha, so clearly they're going to be the over. And I can't believe that maybe I'm just this far disconnected from the casual fan, because I can't believe anybody thinks Anthony Morrow's better than Cephalosha. I mean, let's forget about wins produced and complex basketball analysis. Let's just look at their careers. One player has started for a 50-plus win team 3 years in a row. Another player has never gotten a starting job at any team he's been at, unless like there were injuries galore, and he's bounced around from team to team. Why does anybody think the player who's bounced around and can't land a starting job is better than the guy who's been the starter on a 58-win team for 3 years in a row? It doesn't make any sense to me. And then, okay, that's conventional wisdom, but then let's just looking at the numbers. Anthony Morrow is a great three-point shooter. He's, in fact, if he continues on this pace and has a lively 10, 12-year career, he'll be one of the best of all time at three-point shooting. But that's all he does. Thabo Cephalosha is better in every other category. And like, not just a little bit better, but way better. Like rebounds, like 50% better. Assists, like 50% better. Turnovers, wash. Personal fouls, better. Steals, like 100% better.
But
like,
then, by the way, when you say turnovers, wash like that, but then mention assists, I mean that's generally that. For instance, like LeBron James, if you're going to look at one thing,
if you're passing
LeBron
the ball
James
more, you're going to make more turnovers generally, right?
Yeah. So I'm just saying, like LeBron James is bad at turnovers, but he gets 7 assists a game, which for a small
so if you
power
look at
forward
assist to turnover ratio,
Yeah.
again, Thabo better, not even close. And it's just, I mean, I don't understand. I really don't understand where this logic, where analysis ends at points per game, right? I look at the points per game column and then I just quit and I'm done. Okay, this player is better than that player because points per game is bigger, and that's what we're done. And I mean, this is like analysis that comes from my dad. My dad. I love my dad, but my dad makes Bill Simmons' dad look like a fucking Nobel Prize winner. And it's
wow.
And when it comes to sports,
Ouch.
my dad's actually a very smart guy. But when it comes to sports, especially basketball, it's like, he doesn't know the advanced metrics. It's not. But by the way, insane.
To be fair on that, go to Basketball Reference and look at the box scores that are from, we started getting the advanced box scores in 1978 with the merger with the ABA, but the old box scores, it's great. They actually have the, microfiche or whatever, the image of them, basically points per game is all you used to be able to see for basketball for years and years and years. So it's slightly understandable. But in the field we're in, right, on the blogosphere, where we talk with a bunch of people that call themselves
understandable,
patricians or whatever, and they use that analysis, that's when you're like, really?
Well, and we know that Chris Sheridan's not a sabermetrician, but this is a guy who is a self-proclaimed basketball expert, right? I'm not even done yet.
All right.
I've asked this before. We've got the explicit tag on this podcast,
yes,
right?
Yes.
I'm about to start swearing again. So. Okay, I'm not even done yet. So the thing is, everybody who follows the Thunder knows that the most likely thing that's going to happen this year is that Russ is going to move over to the 2 and Reggie Jackson's going to start. And if that happens, I think the Thunder are better because I think Russell Westbrook is a much better fit at the 2 and Reggie Jackson is not a terrible point guard, so they don't really lose a ton of production at point guard. This is pretty simple math. What that means is that Anthony Morrow is going to play like 15 to 20 minutes a game. He's not going to play Cephalosha's minutes. It's not going to happen. I mean, it's just totally absurd that some guy who for his career has been averaging, 15-ish minutes a game is going to suddenly play the 30 to 35 that Cephalosha used to do and be better than Cephalosha was. Like, where does that come from? How the hell do you? What is that logic?
And to be fair, this is one reason I wish, and I give us a lot of credit. I wish that people would give their reasons when they explain over-unders, because last year, right or wrong on our stuff, the one thing we have going for us, you can mock us all you want for the confidence ratings, and those won't be back. I keep stressing that.
Don't promise anything.
On any article I write, how's that? If I'm doing any projections, I'm throwing confidence intervals out the window. I'm just going to leave a link to my minutes post. But we showed the minute projections and the performance projections for every player. So we said, here's what we think is going to happen. If something goes wrong, if the Bulls do bad, if the Hawks do bad, we can just say, we thought Al Horford and Derrick Rose were going to suit up. They didn't. Life had, that we can touch that. But when people do projections and they basically don't give full reasoning and then just give these kind of spurious, like you're saying, they added this player, so they're going to be better. You can't check that at the end of the season, right? So
this is another great example of, Mr. Sheridan's just like Vegas, right? He's right for all the wrong reasons. So I think the Thunder are probably going to be a little bit better. They're not going to be hugely better because when you win 58 games, there's not really a ton of room to go up, right? But they're going to be a little bit better. And the reason they're going to be a little bit better is because of the aforementioned shift of Russell Westbrook to the 2, and because in all likelihood, and now we go back to your point about minutes, Adams is going to get more minutes and Perkins is going to get less minutes. Now, we might be able to throw that out the window because none of us are huge fans of Scotty. We know that Perkins might inexplicably get 30 minutes a game, and suddenly you can throw all of your projections out the window because Scotty, right? Yeah. I mean, I don't really understand fans in Oklahoma and how they can handle their coach. I mean, I'm not certain why they don't have like allergic reactions when he's introduced.
He's cost him at least one final shot. That's my take. All right, so we're about at time. So you got anything to end over under on, or should I just head us into shout outs?
I don't know. Do you want me to throw out a couple of over under picks?
Sure, that's a good thing. Yeah.
I've said Philadelphia. I think Atlanta's a pretty good one. Although we've been burned by Mr. Horford before, so I'm a little cautious about that one. I think the over on Minnesota is actually pretty promising. Minnesota's not going to be a great team, and obviously the loss of Love hurt. But I think that team's going to cruise to 30 wins because part of the reason is because they actually have a coach and an organization that doesn't want to tank. So they're not going to go to they're not going to be doing things like playing JJ Barea 30 minutes and having Nikola Pekovic shooting 7 threes a game and craziness like that. They're going to actually try to win. And there are just plenty of bad teams that they're going to be able to beat up on, similar to last year. Plus, I think Georgie Jeng, I believe it's pronounced Jeng. I should be embarrassed because I watched a lot of Timberwolves podcasts last year, but in my defense, he didn't start playing minutes until the last 20 games. Anyway, I think he's the real deal, and it's pretty good money that he'll get solid minutes, and that they already are pretty open about the fact that they're going to rest Pekovic a lot, which means he'll get even more minutes. And I think he's really a good deal. And actually, I'm kind of a little bit high on Andrew Wiggins, not in he's going to be a superstar kind of way, but in that he's going to be a serviceable NBA player, which becomes a huge upgrade over Corey Brewer. So I think that team just cruises to 30 wins. I think they could have 35 in them. I think 30 is a cruising. Not that I'm going to be watching many of them because I'm moving over to Cleveland, which I think is another pretty good over bet. They have them at 58 in the rankings I saw,
and I think that's 5 last I saw.
I think that's a 62 win team. Of course, you have the same problem there that you have with one of my other favorite over bets, which is the Spurs. They brought the exact team that won 62 back again. And it's not like they're, the traditional line on the Spurs is, oh, but they got older. It's yeah, but so did Kawhi Leonard, and he was very good, and he's still getting better. The problem you have with the Spurs is similar to the problem with the Cavaliers, is that you don't know if they're going to try to win every game because they're going to rest their stars on certain nights. And I think it's less of a problem with Cleveland. With the Spurs, you have this definite problem that they're literally going to send the starting unit home with a cold. On 5 or 6, 7, 8 nights, probably on every back-to-back second night. And even though the Spurs backup squad is a playoff team easily, but even with that, there's still going to be games they're going to lose that they could win because they're resting, Manu Ginobili or even Kawhi Leonard. The Cavaliers, on the other hand, I think they'll be dogfighting with the Bulls a little bit. So I think it's a safer bet that they will be trying to win the whole season.
Although the
Plus,
Bulls,
have you
man,
seen
the
the pictures
Bulls,
of
you're
LeBron
asking to
James?
get
Because if
burned
you've seen the
again.
pictures of LeBron James, and if you're not like a member of the Cavs organization, when you're looking at the pictures of LeBron James, you should be scared as hell.
You're talking
He
like the weight
definitely
loss
looks.
and all that he did in the
Oh,
off.
he looks slimmed down. He looks fantastic, and it all points to him saying, "Now that I have the best power forward in the game, I'm not going to be playing any power forward anymore," which means I'm going to be making life hell on earth for every small forward in the NBA all season long. That sounds to me like a recipe for 62 games, so 60 wins. So that's my like quick sort of off the
I
cuff,
I
completely
like
not
all of those.
statistical backed reasoning.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's fine, and we'll show the statistical back and get that up and keep people in the loop.
At the end of the day, I'll be honest with you. When I go to Vegas, 90% of the teams I bet on is going to be what Arturo's spreadsheet tells me to do, and 10% is going to be me thinking, "Oh, okay, Arturo's crazy with this one. I'm not going to bet that one."
Fair enough. All right. Well, with that, we're at the end of the show. Like I said, I've got one shout out. I should probably have a couple other. Actually, I've got two. So I'll keep people in the loop on this. I did my due diligence and plugged the Boxscore Geeks. I was on a game show this last week, an internet game show, so it's not live. It was at Channel Awesome. That'll be on some point in the future. It was a ton of fun. That was in the Chicago area. So they're my first shout out. They were great hosts, ton of fun. I'll let people know when it's up. You can hear me talk about the Box Score Geek show and the Denver Nuggets, actually. That came up in the small talk section. And my second shout out is to Al S., who in the 500 plus pages of the NBA CBA did know there was a no strike provision and pointed that out to me in the comments really quick. So that's just anytime you like Larry Kuhn, the CBA, in the comments in like under 5 minutes, I'm just impressed. So those are my shout outs for the week. You got anybody, Patrick?
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to Dan Leroux at Real GM. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right now. I mean, I did a podcast with him over the weekend, which just came out today. Actually, I retweeted about it, and during the podcast, I only called him Danny, so I hope I got his last name right. Anyway, check it out at Real GM. The podcast should still be up there. We talked a little bit about the Southeast Division this week, and it was a lot of fun on that podcast.
Oh, perfect. And one other thing I'll give Real GM just as a shout out. They're one of the few sites that has historical transaction data, easy to parse, because I was looking up like trying to find how many contract years a player signed for 10 years ago. You can find the contract numbers at Basketball Reference, but if I want to know they signed a 5-year deal, that's hard to track down, and Real GM has a lot of that. So they're awesome for that as well. Well, with that in mind, don't worry. We'll definitely have more over-unders coming up. The CBA stuff isn't finished. It's only getting started, so you'll hear more about that. The better news, by the way, is there are preseason games in the work, and the NBA season is on the horizon, so we'll be talking real basketball soon. So looking forward to that. And by the way, for those of you that watch the live show, apologies. I haven't been getting sleep. I'm selling a house, or buying a house, not selling. Buying a house, so I haven't been sleeping as much. So thanks for putting up with me looking half asleep. Thanks, Patrick, for doing most of the talking, so I didn't have to worry about that. And with that,
Yeah.
we will see you next week.
See you later.